Ahoy, hoy.
Hello and welcome to another installment of Biology in the Basement Special Edition Fireside Chats at my made-up hunting cabin here. As you can see, I just got back from safari in Africa by you see me wearing this pith helmet that is, I'm sure, authentic looking. But no, I did not. We're just still in quarantine, not really doing much. So, but I wanted to look cool and maybe get your attention when you see this video ready to roll. So the purpose of this video is to talk about resources and their related terms. That's what we're going to cover, hopefully very quickly. So let's have a fact of the day so that we can get started, and it has to do with our friend the sloth. As you may remember, way back when we used to be in class together, I dream of those days, we talked about how the sloth's most dangerous time was when it had to poop, because it would be the only time it would come out of the trees and it would go down and it would have to poop, and it would only go very infrequently, so it would lose like 1/3 of its body weight or something and get back up to the safety of the trees, if you remember. Well, here's another interesting fact about the sloth. Turns out the sloth's hands, or claws, whatever you want to call them, are actually the exact opposite design as our hands. Where our hands, we have to exert muscles, right, to contract muscles to get our hands to close. The sloth's muscles have to contract to get them to open. So this is why they don't ever have muscle fatigue and fall out of trees. This is why they don't fall out of trees when they're sleeping. As well, little baby sloths don't fall out of trees either. If you were ever worried about that happening, it doesn't. Harpy eagles, on the other hand. Whew. Anyways, let's move on. Resources. In terms of ecosystem and ecology, which we're focusing on here, a resource is defined as anything an organism needs to survive. That could be, for us, things like oxygen, water, food, clothing, shelter. I love a hot shower. I may not need it to survive, but keeps me going. Anyways, those are things that we as a human species need to survive. But let me remind you, with my friend Fernie here, his resource requirements may be a little bit different, right? He doesn't need oxygen, he needs CO2. He doesn't eat a sandwich, he needs sunlight, right? So don't worry, I've been taking care of Fernie. I don't just leave him down here in my basement. I get him out into the light, and I give him water, and my thumb isn't totally green, but we're taking care of him. We understand his resources. Now, when you were originally taught resources, you may have been taught terms like finite and infinite, or renewable and non-renewable, and how certain resources are renewable, non-renewable, things like that, sun, wind, solar, whatever. Um, I'm here to just look at it in a new way. As a graduate of ESF, right, we focus on a new term called sustainability. Are we using a resource at a rate that is sustainable? Are we taking enough fish out of the oceans that when we go back to go fishing 20 years from now, we're still going to be able to have fish in the ocean to eat? And the answer to that is no. So, yes, fish can reproduce, but if we are taking them at an unsustainable rate, we will use up our resources. And so, just something to think about besides this finite, infinite, renewable, non-renewable. We're going to look at it in terms of sustainability. Okay, so let's talk about other resource terms. Here's one that hopefully you remember, right? When we overproduce in Darwin's 5 points, we have competition. That is what is referred to as intra-species, right? competition within the same species, but species compete for the same resources all the time, right? Ferns and other plants are all competing for sunlight. They're different species. There are many species out in the woods that like to eat squirrels and chipmunks and rabbits and things like that. And so between the hawks and the foxes and right, there are competition there as well. The next term related to resources is the limiting factor. This is when you have one resource that prevents the growth of a species from continuing to increase. The example I always like to give to start it out is you come home from school and you say, man, I want a PB&J, right? You look in the cupboards, and if you look in my cupboards, I've got about 6 jars of Jif Crunchy, so I'm prepared. And you go and you grab some peanut butter. You look in the cupboard. You got 17 jars of jelly. Great. Then you go to your bread box and you look, and you've got 4 pieces of bread. Well, how many sandwiches can you make? And this is where we always get, start splitting hairs. Anyways, right? You can make 2 normal peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Does it matter how much bread does it matter how much peanut butter or jelly you have? No, it matters how much bread you have in this situation. That is your limiting factor. Now, we can use this knowledge to help us to understand the environment and get us out of trouble when we make little mistakes. Back in the 70s, we used to put phosphorus in our laundry detergent, and it worked great in cleaning our clothes. But then, of course, the phosphorus came out of the washers into the rivers and the groundwater and into the lakes and streams, and we started to have what were called algal blooms. And algal blooms, they rob oxygen from the lakes. Usually is where we have the biggest problems. And so we passed laws to take phosphorus out of your laundry detergent because that was the limiting factor, right? Algae has plenty of water, plenty of CO2, plenty of sunlight around here, plenty of nitrogen and other nutrients, but what always kept algae in check was phosphorus. And so then once we supplied it with its limiting resource, we realized what a problem it caused. But of course, now we've made better. All right, carrying capacity. Carrying capacity is that amount that a species reaches where it can usually hold no more in that ecosystem or the area where it lives. If a species shows up like it here in the diagram where there's lots of resources, its growth will be exponential, right? But then, of course, we will run out of resources, or the population will be at a level that is unsustainable. There's not enough resources to go around. Another thing, right, is I hate to mention is when many species or members of the same species gather into a small area, it is very easy to transmit disease. Before this coronavirus, we used to talk about, things like deer dying from chronic wasting disease because they were overpopulated in certain parts of New York State. And when deer were living too close together, they were transmitting disease to each other. And so it was another reason why they had to start shooting deer, not for meat or any other reason except for to prevent the transmission of this disease. And so that's another reason why this population reaches a carrying capacity and the numbers drop off, right? We have competition for all the resources. We have disease breaking out. The ecosystem itself may have been used up and needs time to regrow or replenish those resources, and so it will remain low for a while. But any good species will hang near that carrying capacity, as you can see there. Also, it doesn't take much to exist in an ecosystem, is if you can specialize. Here's where we start to look at the intersection of ecology and evolution, where, as you can see here, we have an example of 5 different fish that all live in the same lake. Now, each one of these fish, as you'll see when you look at it, you probably can't see it now, but when you look at it in your notes that I share with you, each one of these fish consumes something different, whether it's the eggs or the larva or whole fish or insects themselves. They all consume different things. They have different roles. They serve a different purpose. They fill a different niche. That is this term, or niche, as they say, right? A niche is simply the role an organism plays in its environment. And it's what keeps these species from competing day in and day out. They're in charge of different things. We can look at it on a larger scale where, right, we have the producers at the bottom. Their niche is to take the sunlight, turn it into something we can use. And then we have the herbivores in the middle, and their job is to keep the grass population down and to consume. And then there are other consumers on top of that. But then, of course, we need decomposers to break this all down, so we do have a functioning ecosystem. And so those are all different roles that are needed in an environment, and we call those niches. Like I said, here is your crossover to evolution, where Darwin's finches are another example through adaptive radiation, if you remember that term, on how species, just through competition and variation and migration to these different islands and different environments, they were able to form different species. And the question is, on a given day, do these guys compete? No, because they all eat different stuff. Yes, if there was a drought and certain seeds were gone, yes, there would be competition between certain ones, but day in and day out, these guys all live happily. All right, next time we're going to talk about the members of the ecosystem beyond just some simple terms. We'll get into the nitty-gritty. So, taking off from my safari, this is Mr. Andraco. You have a good one.